So, let's talk about Mount St Helens, shall we? On May 18th of 1980, Mount St Helens erupted and killed 57 people that were not supposed to be there. There had been warning eruptions for weeks ahead of time. There had been earthquakes. The USGS had gone to great lengths to try to get people to leave the area. Not everyone did, and some of those who died were USGS employees. That's the official account. Now let's talk about my father's involvement with Mount St Helens. At this point, Daddy had officially retired from the military to go to work for one of the major contracting agencies. Now, my father's original mission when he went into the military was as a radio officer. Well, he was a radio grunt. He worked his way up to being an officer. The man had a very long career. But while he was in, he became one of the people who was helping to develop a clandestine sonic weaponry program that began in the 1960s, was temporarily derailed during Vietnam, and then picked up steam again in the mid-1970s and continued into the 1980s. In early March of 1980, Daddy took a business trip. He was gone for 2 weeks. This was unusual because while we'd been used to him deploying when he was in the military, he was supposed to be out. But he was gone for 2 weeks on this business trip, came back, told us he couldn't talk about it, which we were kind of used to hearing. March 16th, the earthquake swarms at Mount St Helens began. They began out of the blue. There was no warning ahead of time that this was something that was going to happen. So, roughly 2 days after my father got back from his business trip, the earthquakes started up. March 27th was the first official eruption at the mountain. It came out in a place that, according to the geologists, it should not have erupted from. In fact, the geologists said there should not have been magma underneath the mountain at all. It was 16 miles away from the nearest magma dome. But there it was. That immediately sparked another emergency business trip, and Daddy left in the middle of the night on March 27th and got home just before Easter that year, which was April 6th. Again, he could not talk about what he had been doing or what the nature of his business trip was. May 18th, the second week in May, he had another business trip. This one was planned. He left at a normal time of day. He got to say goodbye before he left. May 18th was the eruption. Half the mountain blew off. The resulting pyroclastic ash flows killed 57 people. Daddy went back for another business trip immediately afterwards. He was gone May 19th, again left the middle of the night. And when he came back, he brought me a vial full of ash from the mountain. So I know he had been there at that time. That was his gift to me for having been gone so much after having retired, so that he wouldn't have to be leaving. I still have that vial of ash. It is tucked safely away at my mother's house after 40 years. Now, when Daddy hit his final illness, he went through a phase where he was reliving his sins. He went through a phase where he was racked with guilt for the people who had died because of things he had done. Most of what he ranted and raved about were people who had died under his command when he was in war zones. Both his own people and the enemy. And it was heartbreaking listening to him talk about it. But there was one day when I was visiting, and he grabbed my arm and he said, "I killed 60 people on that mountain." He said, "I don't know how many animals died. I don't know how many of the hairy men died. But I know I killed 60 people on that mountain, and I am going to face their souls in hell." That was one of the last coherent things he was capable of saying before the dementia rotted his brain to the point where he could no longer talk. It is that pain, that fear in my father's voice that has me making these videos. From going through paperwork afterwards, including some that probably should not have been in a civilian household, paperwork that had been written after he left the military and after he left the government. My father was working on sonic weaponry. He was developing a device that could be used to disrupt the ground underneath an opposing force's feet, a device that could turn deserts into quicksand and swallow entire armies. That was what he was developing in the 1980s. At that time was he was a military contractor working with a branch of NASA, and I still have some of the computer punch cards that they used for programming to send Voyager out of the solar system. Voyager 2, not Voyager 1. But Daddy's real mission was developing this weapon that I believe he fervently hoped would end war. Because if your soldiers cannot march, you cannot go into battle. It was that weapon that was being stored in a cave in Multnomah, Oregon. It was that weapon that was being tested in the spring of 1980. And they were testing it in the Cascades in a fairly remote area, specifically so they would minimize civilian interference in what they were doing. I believe Daddy tried his best to make sure that no one would get hurt while they were testing this weaponry. But in testing the weapons in a mountain range, they activated something. They opened up tunnels that let magma travel 16 miles underground to under Mount St Helens and caused the eruption there. So there you go. Something that I don't think any conspiracy theorist has talked about, at least not that I've heard. The eruption of Mount St Helens was not a natural event. It was the result of sonic weaponry testing of a weapon developed by my father as a weapon of war. Tested in the United States and killing 60 United States and Canadian citizens in an unplanned result. Now, digging up this information, verifying this information has taken me 40 years, and I found out a lot of other secrets in the process. So if you are more interested in hearing more, please leave me a comment. Let me know that these words are being heard. Let me know that people want to hear the truth about what was happening in the late 70s, early 80s, and quite honestly, some of it has continued up into the mid-2015-2016 range. Let me know that you want these words to be heard, and I will keep making these videos. Even though I recognize that was a helicopter that flew over a minute ago. I recognize putting these videos out puts me in danger. I recognize that if my family is identified as the source of this information, we could all be in danger just for knowing what we know. Because Daddy was supposed to carry these secrets to his grave. He damn near did. But, thank you for listening. Thank you for talking about this. Thank you for letting people know what's really going on out there.